The phone rang just after midnight, a sound so sharp it felt like it cut through the room. I hadn't heard my brother's voice in years, yet I knew it instantly when he said my name. Eskesberd, calm and certain at the Krusink and the pumdit dan of Prasamiro. Then he whispered, calm and certain, I know what you did last summer. We grew up in a small lakeside town where silence was a kind of inheritance. Passed down through glances and closed doors. My brother left years ago after a falling out neither of us ever named, and I stayed, building a quiet life on routines and avoidance. That summer, hot, heavy, unforgettable, had been buried under seasons of denial, or so I thought. Now, with one phone call, the past had found a way back in. The phone lit up the room like a match struck in a closet. Not enough to brighten anything, just enough to show the shape of my hands, the outline of the blanket, the soft rise of my chest like I'd been holding my breath all day. Outside, the street lamp blinked the way it always did when it rained earlier. The window was slightly open, and the screen rattled in the wind. I didn't reach for the phone right away. Kent, because somehow, before I even saw the name, I knew some calls don't ring, they accuse. It was past midnight, the kind of late that makes a house feel older. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen like it was trying to stay awake. Every few minutes it clicked, small and tired, then went back to its steady breathing. I lay there with one arm over my eyes, listening, not to anything specific. Haptek, Kapta Pafriakos, just listening the way you do when you live alone long enough to start hearing yourself think. Calais. The sheets were cool where my legs had moved. There was a cup on the nightstand with a little water left in it, and it smelled faintly like old lemon. And I'd been dreaming something strange, someone calling my name from far away. But the dream slipped off me the second the phone began to vibrate. No ringtone. Just that quiet buzzing against the wood like a warning. I turned my head. The screen glowed. Caleb. My brother. I hadn't heard his voice in months, and still, my stomach tightened like my body remembered him before I did. Smemspit? Caleb never called this late. He didn't call at all unless something had happened. And even then, he usually texted, you awake? Call me when you can. But this was different. This was him reaching straight into the dark. I sat up slowly, the mattress sighing beneath me like it didn't want me to leave whatever sleep I still had. The room felt too quiet, like even the walls were listening. I let the phone buzz twice more, then 3. My thumb hovered. I told myself I could ignore it. I told myself it could wait until morning. But my body didn't believe that. My body was already halfway out of the bed. I answered, hello? Again there was a pause. There was a pause. Not silence, not static. Just his breathing. Cranked. Like he was holding the phone close and thinking about what kind of damage a voice can do. Then Caleb spoke. Hey, his voice was steady, too steady. He sounded like he'd practiced the shape of that word. The way you practice in the mirror before you step into a room you've been avoiding. I swallowed Caleb. What's wrong? He didn't answer right away. I heard something faint on his end. Maybe a ceiling fan, maybe the hum of a highway. Maybe just the world moving on while we stayed still. He cleared his throat. I need to talk to you. My hand tightened around the phone. You're talking to me. He let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but not warm. Tentispermade 5. Not warm, not like this. Rake. The pause after that felt heavy, like a drawer being opened in an old house, dust lifting, things shifting. And I stared at the floor beside my bed. There was a sock there, inside out, like it had given up halfway through the day. Did something happen? I asked, softer this time. Caleb's voice lowered. It's time we talked about everything. My stomach pulled in on itself. Everything what? He didn't say my name, but I felt it anyway, sitting between us like a third person. Frequence, he said. I didn't, or maybe I did. But I hadn't allowed myself to say it out loud in years. I licked my lips, Caleb. It's midnight, I know. His voice stayed calm, but there was something underneath it. A tremble disguised as control, he went on. I didn't want to call you like this. Then why did you? Another pause. Then, because I can't keep it in anymore. I shifted on the edge of the bed, my feet finding the cold floor. Yeah, the cold came up through my toes like a memory. "You're scaring me," I said. And it was true. Not because he sounded angry, but because he sounded certain. Certain people don't call in the middle of the night unless they've already decided what the truth is. Caleb's voice softened, almost tender. "I'm not trying to scare you." He hesitated. I'm trying to give you a chance," then said, "I'm trying to give you a chance." I blinked. A chance for what? I opened my mouth to ask, but he kept talking, slow, deliberate. "I know something," he said. My heart thudded once, hard. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, like distance could change what he'd said. When I put it back, my voice barely worked. "What do you mean? You know something?" Caleb exhaled. Long. Cat. "I've known for a while." The air in the room felt thin now. "Like someone had cracked a window in my chest," I whispered. Caleb, "What is this?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He just said it like a fact, like he was reading the weather. "UK? I'm not going to explain it over the phone." My throat tightened. "Why not?" "God, because the phone isn't a place for certain truths. Because the phone makes it too easy to hang up. Because confession sounds different when you're not looking someone in the face." Caleb's voice came through again, almost gentle. "I just need you to meet me. When tomorrow?" I laughed once, sharp and broken. "Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, I know," he said. And then, as if he'd been waiting to say it, "That feels fitting, doesn't it?" I stared at the dark window. The street lamp outside flickered. My reflection in the glass looked pale. Like someone I used to be," I asked. "Where?" Caleb didn't answer right away. I imagined him sitting somewhere with his back against a wall, hands clasped, eyes open. He said, "Mom's house." My stomach dropped. Mom's house hadn't been Mom's house in years, not since she died. Not since we stopped pretending it belonged to anyone but the past. I swallowed hard. "I haven't been there." "Yeah, I know," he said again. This time the word sounded less like agreement and more like grief. He added, "That's part of it." The room seemed to tilt. The refrigerator clicked off in the kitchen. The silence that followed was huge. I whispered, "What did I do?" Caleb's voice softened, but it didn't comfort. "Okay, I'm not saying you did anything," he said. Then quieter, "I'm saying something followed you." The sentence landed like a stone in water. No splash, just a deep pull downward. Haka tetasans hin hamha. My mind reached for something to hold on to, a memory, a detail, a reason. But all I could feel was the shape of fear I'd carried my whole life without naming it. I asked, "Followed me from where?" Caleb didn't answer, not right away. Then, from that night, my stomach turned. My skin prickled. I didn't know what night he meant. Or maybe I did. Maybe I'd always known. Yeah. I just never let myself look. My voice came out barely a sound. "What night?" Caleb's breathing changed. Like he was gripping something, like he was standing on the edge of a truth he hadn't forgiven himself for. He said, "I can't do this on the phone," and something in me broke a little, quietly. Because he was right, the phone couldn't hold what he was about to hand me. Then he said, "Just come tomorrow, please." The word "please" cracked slightly. That was the first time I heard it. The fear behind his steadiness, the boy underneath the man. I stared at my knee, pale in the phone's light. I whispered, "Okay." Caleb didn't speak for a second. Then softly, "Thank you," and before I could ask anything else. The line went dead. I stayed sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, like maybe his voice had sunk into the plastic and I could pull it back out if I tried. But all I heard was my own breathing. The refrigerator hummed again, like nothing had happened. Like the house hadn't just shifted on its foundation. I lowered the phone slowly. The screen dimmed. My room returned to darkness. But the darkness didn't feel the same. It felt awake. I looked toward the window. The street lamp blinked once, then held steady. And in that thin line of light along the curtain, I realized something I didn't want to know. You know? Asian. I'd been running from a truth for so long. I'd forgotten what it looked like standing still. Tomorrow, I would step into Mom's house again. And whatever had followed me might finally catch up. Morning didn't arrive like it used to. It didn't spill in bright and hopeful. It crept. Soft gray light sliding across the porch boards like a hand looking for something it lost. When I pulled into the driveway, the tires rolled over the same loose gravel, and the sound hit me like a name I hadn't heard in years. The house sat there, quiet and patient, paint peeling at the corners, curtains sun-faded to a tired yellow. Like it had been holding its breath since the day we left, and when I shut off the engine, the silence felt familiar, too familiar. I stayed in the car longer than I needed to. My hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers stiff, like they weren't sure what they were allowed to touch anymore. The air inside the car smelled faintly like coffee from the gas station down the road. Underneath that, the old scent of pine from the little tree hanging from my rearview mirror. Something artificial trying to cover something real. The front steps looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd gotten older. Maybe everything that debrast. Maybe everything looks smaller when you come back with weight in your chest. The porch railing leaned slightly, still faithful enough to hold someone if they asked. A wind chime hung crooked near the door, quiet now. It used to sing every time the breeze moved through. Mom loved that sound. She said it made the house feel like it was breathing. I stared at the door until my eyes started to blur, not from tears. From staring too hard at something I didn't want to admit was still mine. I thought about Caleb's voice on the phone. It's time. I thought about the way he said Mom's house like the words had thorns in them. And I realized something that unsettled me more than the call. This wasn't just a place. It was a witness. I opened the car door. Cold air slid into the cabin. I stepped out, and the gravel shifted under my shoes like it recognized my weight. The key still worked. That surprised me, like the house had never bothered learning a new lock. I pushed the door open slowly. It stuck at first, then gave way with a long, tired groan. The sound went through me, aged wood. Old hinges, a throat clearing after years of silence. Inside, it smelled like dust and something sweet that had forgotten to rot, not fresh, not dead, just held. The air was cooler than outside, like the house had been saving shade. I stepped onto the floorboards and paused. They creaked under my weight. The exact same note they used to make when I was a kid sneaking out late for water. I closed the door behind me, and the quiet wrapped around my shoulders. There was a thin line of sunlight coming through the curtains, cutting across the living room carpet like a blade. The furniture was still there, covered in sheets. Shanks draped in white like ghosts that didn't want to be seen. On the wall, the family photos were gone, but the faded squares where they used to hang remained, lighter patches. Like the walls had been protected from memory until now I walked further in. My hand brushed the hallway wall, and the paint felt chalky dry. I didn't know why I touched it. Maybe I wanted proof the house was real. Maybe I wanted it to flinch, but it didn't. It just stayed. In the kitchen, the table was still there. The one with the burn mark near the edge from when Dad set down a pot too fast. I ran my fingers along that scar. It felt smoother than I expected, like time had been rubbing it down. I heard a sound in my head then, Caleb laughing. Loud, reckless laughter, the kind that makes adults shake their heads but smile anyway. And before I could stop it, I remembered the summer heat, windows open. Cicadas screaming outside like they were angry at the sun. Mom yelling from the sink. Don't run in this house. Caleb replying, already halfway down the hall. It can't catch me. And the floorboards creaking in protest like they were trying. I moved from room to room like I was walking through water, slow, careful. As if something might ripple if I stepped too hard. In the hallway, I stopped at the spot where our heights used to be marked on the wall. The pencil lines were still there, faint but stubborn. Caleb's was higher, of course. His name written in slanted handwriting, mine underneath, smaller, neater. I traced my finger over my own name, and a strange warmth hit my chest. Soft and painful. Like hearing someone say your childhood nickname after years of being called something else. At the end of the hall was Mom's bedroom. The door was cracked. I hadn't thought about that door in a long time, not the door itself, what it meant. I pushed it open with 2 fingers. The room was dim, curtains drawn. Dust floated in the thin morning light like slow snow. The bed was made, not neatly, just pulled together. Like someone had tried to leave it respectable. On the dresser, an old brush sat beside a small bottle of perfume. The bottle was half empty, the label peeling. I picked it up, uncapped it. The scent rose instantly, powdery, floral. A little sharp, Mom. It hit me so fast my eyes burned. UK. I set it down carefully, like it could shatter if I handled it wrong. And then I heard my own voice in my memory, small and scared. Cut, Mom. Another memory followed, uninvited. A night. A loud voice, not shouting exactly, but tight. Dad's voice, low, controlled. Caleb crying. And me, standing somewhere I shouldn't have been, listening from the dark. That memory didn't have an ending. It just stopped, like someone tore the page out and left the book on the floor. My heartbeat changed. I stepped back from the dresser, suddenly aware of how still the room was, how the house didn't creak now. Didn't protest. It felt like it was holding something. Like it had been waiting for me to stand in this room again. I left Mom's bedroom quickly. Not running. But close. The hallway seemed longer than before, the air heavier. I needed space. I pushed open the back door. Outside, the world looked the same and not. The backyard grass had grown wild around the edges. The old swing set leaned slightly to the left, chains rusted. A rope still hung from the oak tree by the fence, frayed at the bottom. We used to dare each other to climb it. Caleb always went first, always. Like he had to prove something to the sky, I walked toward the lake. The path was narrow, weeds brushing my ankles, damp from morning dew. My shoes sank slightly in soft earth. The air smelled like water and fallen leaves, even though it wasn't autumn. The lake came into view, and I stopped. It was flat, so flat it didn't look real. It held the sky perfectly, like a mirror that didn't know how to break. The surface glowed pale in the morning light, no waves, no birds, just stillness, and I remembered the way we used to swim out there. How the water felt cold around my ribs, even in July. How was a détente cessor for the hack were. How Caleb would dive under and grab my ankle just to make me scream. And how Dad would stand on the shore and call out, pretending to be annoyed. Ew, don't go too far. But he never came closer. He always stood at the same distance, hands on his hips, watching. I stared at the lake now and felt something tighten in my throat. And because lakes don't look like that unless they're hiding something, I don't know why I thought that. Maybe because I'd spent years trying not to look too deeply into anything, not into memories, not into people, and not into myself. I crouched near the water's edge, picked up a smooth stone, rolled it between my fingers. Then I tossed it gently Then he tossed it gently. It should have skipped, but it didn't. It sank, quiet. Like it didn't even want to disturb the surface. The ripples were small, temporary. And then the lake went still again. I stood there a long time, not thinking, just letting the cold morning air press against my face. Behind me, the house didn't make a sound. But I could feel it, like someone watching from a window without curtains. I turned back toward it slowly. Toward those creaking floors, toward those faded walls. Toward the marks on the hallway where our names still clung like proof. The sun climbed higher, brightening everything that used to feel hidden, and still the lake stayed flat. Still reflective. Like it knew what I didn't, like it remembered what I'd spent my whole life trying to forget. I walked back up the path, stone-damp shoes and a dry throat. And I realized something quietly. This house hadn't changed. It didn't need to. It had been holding the truth for me, and soon Caleb would ask me to take it back. The porch swing creaked with every breeze, its rhythm almost soothing, but it wasn't. The sun was low, the kind of late afternoon sun that seems to soak everything in gold, making even the shadows feel warm. Caleb stood at the bottom of the steps, hands shoved deep in his pockets, like he couldn't quite bring himself to leave. I was sitting on the porch, watching the way the light bent through the trees, the way it caught in the leaves and made everything seem alive and heavy, with history. His voice was too sharp. It cut through the silence. Are you really just going to stay here? I gasped the saw. I didn't answer right away. The swing kept moving. I remember the air that day, thick, humid. It clung to the skin, and the house felt like it had soaked it all in, too. The floorboards in the hallway were soft underfoot, worn down by years of feet walking past, each one leaving a trace. It was a feeling I couldn't escape. The porch had always been mine. I'd spent hours out there as a kid, pretending the world was still wide open, that nothing had ever happened to make it shrink. Now, I sat there still, the heat heavy in my chest. There were moments when it felt like I could just sink into the wood beneath me, let everything go. But there was Caleb, always Caleb. He stood waiting, his silhouette too still against the fading light. He was tense in a way I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did. He had always been the one who left. Left town, left me. Kinna. His eyes were like the storm that rolled in just before everything broke apart. The kind of silence that makes you think the world is holding its breath. And can't anani mai. And then he spoke, "You can't stay here forever." His words, those sharp ones, pulled me back to that porch where we stood. Years ago, the same fight but with different skin. The sound of his voice echoed down the street, too loud against the quiet hum of the evening. "You think everything is still the same?" Caleb shook his head. "You're pretending again, pretending like nothing changed." I didn't know how to answer him. My tongue felt thick, like the words I wanted to say had been buried too deep to find. He paced a little up and down the driveway, restless. He always had to move when he was upset, like if he didn't, he'd choke on it. "I'm not pretending," I said finally. My voice was slow, deliberate, like I was trying to convince myself. "I'm just trying to hold on to something that doesn't feel broken," Caleb scoffed, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked at me like he couldn't understand what I meant, like I wasn't speaking the same language. Hold on to what?" he asked, his voice quieter now. But there was a weight to it, a heaviness that made the air feel thick. "To this place? To a memory of a life we're never going to get back? You're staying here because you don't want to deal with what's really wrong. You're staying here because you don't want to deal with what's really wrong." I stood up, the swing swaying behind me, the creak too loud. The space between us felt like a canyon. And in that silence I saw him. For the first time in years, I saw Caleb as a stranger, someone who'd seen the cracks in me before I'd ever admitted they were there. He started for his car, a look of frustration sharp on his face, his steps quick, determined. It was always the same. Whenever things got too real, he would run. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself it was easier this way. But part of me wondered if he was running because he knew something I wasn't ready to face. The gravel crunched under Caleb's shoes as he walked toward the car. His back was to me, and I felt something break inside. Just a small crack, but it was there. "Caleb," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I didn't leave," I said, though I wasn't sure why I was saying it. "I didn't leave you." The words felt clumsy, like I hadn't spoken them in years. Caleb didn't respond. He stood there for a long time, the silence thick between us. His shoulders were hunched, a familiar posture I knew too well from when we were kids, when something had hurt him, but he refused to say it out loud. "I didn't leave because of that night," I said finally. Softer now, he didn't move. His hands gripped the car door tightly, knuckles white. But he didn't look at me, not yet. I didn't leave because of anything other than I swallowed. It felt like there was something lodged in my throat, something I hadn't let myself admit to anyone. Not even him, because of what? Caleb asked, his voice shaking now. What was it then? I didn't have an answer for him. But I knew it was something I hadn't wanted to face, something buried deep in the past where neither of us had been willing to go. The engine of his car hummed quietly as he turned the key, the sound sharp in the still air. I stared at him, knowing that in that moment the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was everything we'd never said, everything we'd never been able to face together. The car pulled away, and I stayed there watching the dust swirl behind him. The street was quiet again, the air too still. The porch swing creaked once more, swaying gently in the breeze that had suddenly lost its warmth. I walked slowly back to the edge of the porch, my hand brushing the railing. The wood was rough under my fingertips, the same texture it had always been. The house, still standing, still the same, held its breath like it was waiting for me to fill the silence. I calmed her. I thought about Caleb driving away, and the way the sun had dipped lower, casting longer shadows on the ground, like time itself was trying to escape. I thought about how I'd told myself it was better this way. But deep down, I wondered if Caleb knew something I didn't. And if I would ever be brave enough to find out. I stayed on the porch for a while longer. The wind, soft and unsure, pressed against my skin. But it wasn't enough to fill the space he left behind. The cicadas were louder that night than I remembered. I'd always thought of their song as a summer soundtrack, something distant, almost pleasant. But that night, it felt like they were pressing in, pushing against the air with every hum. The heat hung in the space between breaths, thick and heavy, like the world was waiting for something to happen. I sat on the old dock, the wood slick under my hands, watching the way the water moved in lazy ripples. The music from the party floated across the lake, faint and muffled, as if it had already traveled too far to matter anymore. I could still feel the sweat on my skin, the kind that made you forget where you ended and the summer began. The sun had been out too long, and it hadn't seemed to matter until it was time for the night to come. The air didn't cool the way it used to when I was younger. There was no relief. Everything felt stretched. And like the whole world had been pulled thin, and we were just waiting for the snap. The lake was still. It never seemed to stay still for long. It used to sparkle when the light hit it right, but tonight, it only held the reflection of the sky, a dark, quiet thing. The party was still going, and I could hear laughter, music, voices drifting over the water. I'd been there at first, standing in the crowd like everyone else. People mingling, the clinking of bottles, the way the music made the ground shake just a little. But it wasn't long before I found myself on that dock, fingers trailing through the water, too tired to join in. I looked around. There were so many faces, so many bodies moving in the distance, but it felt empty. Like I was alone, even in the crowd. And that's when I noticed my brother, Caleb, moving quickly through the yard. His steps were too sharp, too deliberate, like he was trying to outrun something. I didn't know what. But it wasn't long before he was gone. I remember how the air thickened, how the sounds of the party faded as I sat there alone. I wanted to ask myself what was happening, but I already knew I wouldn't find the answer. The fire pit was still burning, the flickering orange light casting long shadows on the ground. People were gathered around it, laughing louder now, the tension of the night settling in as the day finally let go. But in the distance, Caleb was gone. I should have gone after him. I think I knew then that something had shifted. I didn't know how, I didn't know why. But I could feel it in the way the night air felt thicker around me, like it had changed in some subtle way that I couldn't see. The music started to shift, the beats slower now, the drums had more weight to them. And for a moment it seemed like everything blurred together, the heat, the music, the people, the night stretching on, until it was just noise. And I found myself standing, walking through the yard, without really knowing where I was going. My feet moved automatically, like I had been here before, but Caleb wasn't here. The space between us was already too wide. By the time I reached the edge of the yard, where the path led down to the water, the crowd felt distant, unreal. And there, by the tree near the edge of the clearing, Caleb stood, staring at something I couldn't see. His back was to me, and I knew, even from that distance, that he hadn't seen me yet. I wasn't sure if I should call out, but I found myself doing it anyway. My voice felt small in the vastness of the night. Caleb, he didn't turn right away. He just stood there, his shoulders tense, his hands in his pockets like he was trying to hold everything inside. When he did turn around, there was nothing in his eyes, no warmth, no recognition. Just something empty that I couldn't place. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice coming out too sharp. He didn't answer at first, just stood there, staring. Then his eyes flicked to the party, then back to me. The silence stretched, thick and full of something I couldn't name. "I'm not going back in," he finally said, his voice low but steady. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He just looked distant. I felt a shift in me too then. Like everything we had been wasn't the same anymore. "Why?" I asked again. "What happened?" His eyes moved over my face like he was searching for something. Then he shook his head. I don't belong in there anymore. It felt like the world had just shifted, tilted just enough to make everything off balance. The words were simple, but there was a weight to them that I couldn't understand. And I don't know why I said it, but I did. Maybe you never did. Hey! His eyes met mine then, and for the first time that night I saw something. Not anger, not regret. But something darker, something more real. The space between us felt smaller, but also impossibly far. I stood there for a long time, the hum of the cicadas the only sound around us. The music from the party drifted over the lake, but it felt like it came from another life. Caleb didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked back toward the woods, his step steady, socks, like he had already decided where he was going. A cow, I stayed by the tree, my feet rooted to the ground. The night stretched on, and I could still feel the heat in the air, the sweat on my skin. But the lake, it stayed still, not a ripple. I didn't go after him. I didn't call his name. Because by then I think I knew, some things we never get to fix, and some things we can't change. The silence wrapped around me like a familiar coat, and the world felt both too big and too small all at once. And somewhere, in the distance, I could still hear the cicadas, still buzzing, still waiting. Kapar! The moon was thin, barely a sliver in the sky. The night felt older than it should, heavy with quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt peaceful. It felt waiting. I stood at the edge of the lake, toes digging into the cool dirt, feeling the dampness of the night air creeping through my clothes. The water in front of me stretched black and still, swallowing the sound of everything but my breath. Brass! The lake had always scared me like that. Like it could swallow anything, everything, and leave nothing behind but the ripple of something forgotten. I could feel the weight in my chest, but I didn't move. Not yet. I remember the way the night felt. The temperature had dropped quickly, unexpectedly. The air, once thick and sticky with humidity, had turned cold, sharp against the skin. My breath came out in little clouds, disappearing into the dark. The only sound was the steady lap of water against the shore, as if the lake had been breathing in time with me. The old dock, worn and groaning with age, stretched into the lake behind me, its wood slick with dew. I had never liked standing on it. The planks always felt like they might give way. Nar died. Like the whole thing might collapse under the weight of too many years of secrets. The water below seemed to breathe beneath me, alive almost. I hadn't meant to come out here. Not really. But after the party, after Caleb had disappeared into the woods, something pulled me. Something darker than just the need for air. It was always like this, wasn't it? The way the night presses in when you're too tired to keep pretending. I stood there, staring at the water, the darkness too deep to see what lay beneath. The ripples moved in strange patterns, distorting the reflection of the sky above. It felt like the lake was waiting too, watching. And that's when it came to me, whatever I had been carrying all this time, the thing I had been avoiding. I could finally let it go. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the small object I had brought with me. Cold, smooth, like it had been waiting for this moment too. It wasn't much. Just something small, a keepsake I'd kept hidden for years, tucked away like a secret I hadn't been ready to face. A thing from another life, another time, when the world felt smaller and easier to navigate. Back when it was just me and Caleb and the days stretched long in front of us, full of possibility. But tonight I couldn't keep it anymore. I pulled it out slowly, a silver pendant, simple. A circle with a small engraving on the back that only I could read. It was something Mom had given me once, long ago. I don't remember when, but I remember her hands, the way they had trembled slightly as she placed it in my palm. For when you need to remember, she'd said, but I hadn't been able to remember, not like she meant. I stared at it for a long time. The pendant glinted in the pale light, its shine too bright in the dark. And then, without thinking, I stepped closer to the water. I held the pendant out in front of me, fingers trembling. The night was so still, it felt like even the air was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the choice. I let go. The pendant dropped through the air with a soft hiss, barely breaking the surface before it sank. The ripples spread out quickly, small and fleeting, disappearing into the dark water. I waited. I stared at the spot where it had fallen, hoping for something, anything, to happen. But the water stayed calm, too calm, nothing changed. My heart pounded in my chest, the silence heavy in my ears. What had I expected? For the lake to spit it back out? For the water to refuse what I had just given it? I had always imagined this moment differently, thought it would feel like some kind of release. A lightness, maybe. Like I could breathe again, but I just stood there, watching the ripples disappear into nothing. I couldn't even remember the last time I had really felt anything. Not like this. The moon was still there, thin and distant, its reflection wavering on the surface of the water. The night was still, but the tension in the air hadn't gone away. It sat there, thick and heavy. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to turn and leave all of it behind. But there was a voice in me, a quiet one, that told me I couldn't. I looked down, my breath coming faster now. Why didn't it feel like enough? I stood there for what felt like hours, watching the water. The ripples from the pendant had long since disappeared, but the lake didn't feel any quieter. It never did. I felt cold now, like the night had seeped into my bones. I glanced back toward the shore, where the faint lights from the house were still visible, flickering like distant stars. The sounds of the party, faint and scattered, drifted across the water, but they seemed so far away now. And then just like that, the weight I'd been carrying felt even heavier, more solid. I hadn't expected it to be easy, but I hadn't expected to feel so empty. I took a step back from the edge, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The cold night air bit at my skin, but I didn't shiver. I just stood there for a moment longer, the darkness closing in around me. The lake, still and unfeeling, stared back. Waiting, I turned and walked away. The sound of the water behind me faded, but it wasn't gone. It never would be. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, too slowly, as if it were waiting for something. I stared at it for a long time, the steady sound almost comforting in its predictability. The room around me was quiet, too quiet. The old couch, worn from years of use, sat under the soft glow of a single lamp. The window, cracked just slightly, let in the night air, cool and dry against my skin. I hadn't been asleep for long, but the dreams, if you could call them that, kept dragging me back. The water, the endless ripples. I tried to push it away, but some things stick. And the years that followed felt like a blur. I built my story, piece by piece. It was careful, calculated, a survival tactic. I told myself it was an accident, that no one was hurt the way it felt. But the truth, the real truth, had always been a slippery thing. It stayed just out of reach, hiding in corners of the house I didn't want to visit. I never spoke about it, not out loud, not to anyone who might ask. The world moved on just like it always does. Jobs came and went. Seasons passed without a single word about that night. People stopped asking questions, and I let them. I kept my head down, focused on the simple things, work, the laundry, the bills. But there were nights when I still woke up, my heart pounding, hearing the water move. The ripples I couldn't stop, the ones I could never erase. I used to wonder if I would ever feel the way I did before. If I could ever look at the world without that knot in my chest. But every time I thought I was getting close, I'd hear the sound again, just barely, like a memory slipping under my skin. And then I'd tell myself it was nothing. I sat up in bed, the sheets tangled around my legs. The air was heavy, the weight of silence pressing down on the room. I could feel the night stretching out in front of me, thick and endless. I had gotten good at pretending. I had gotten good at believing the story I'd built. It was an accident. It wasn't as bad as it seemed. But some nights when the house creaked too loudly, or the wind knocked against the window just the right way, that story didn't hold up. The cracks in the walls seemed to whisper, and my own breath felt too loud. I stood up slowly, the cold floor against my bare feet, a reminder that the world kept moving. It kept turning, even when I didn't want it to, even when I couldn't catch up. I walked toward the window, running my hand along the sill. The night outside felt endless. The stars were barely visible, hidden behind a veil of clouds. The sound of distant traffic hummed in the background, muffled but constant. Oh, frakmek sasat and kara. I stared out into the dark, waiting for something to shift. But nothing did. It never did. I wanted to be at peace. I wanted to feel like the story I told myself was enough to make it stop, but I wasn't sure anymore. There was a knock at the door. Yeah. I stood still for a moment, the quiet hanging in the air like a thick fog. The knock came again, this time louder. It was unexpected. I wasn't expecting anyone, not at this hour. I glanced at the clock. Late. Too late. I moved toward the door slowly, my steps quieter than usual. When I opened it, I wasn't sure what I expected, but there he was, Caleb. His face, tired and worn, seemed older than I remembered. His eyes, always too sharp, were dull now. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his posture stiff, like he didn't know how to stand in front of me. I waited for him to speak. I always waited for him to speak. I had to see you, he finally said, his voice soft but heavy. The words settled between us like they had been waiting for years. I nodded slowly, stepping aside to let him in. He didn't move, not immediately. I didn't want to come, he said, his voice strained. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About that night, I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. The silence stretched between us, long and uncomfortable. He was still standing in the doorway, his feet not quite crossing the threshold, like he was waiting for something. Or maybe he was waiting for me to say it, you remember too, but I didn't. Not really. Do you ever wonder, he asked, his voice low, if we lied to ourselves about it all this time? I felt the air in the room change, as if something invisible had snapped. I hadn't thought about it like that before. I hadn't let myself. But in that moment, standing there in the doorway with him, it was like the walls closed in a little tighter. Like something was ready to crack wide open. Caleb stepped into the room, but neither of us moved to sit. We just stood there. He didn't look at me. He never did when it mattered. The room felt smaller with him in it. Too many years of silence, of unspoken things, settled around us like dust. I could hear the clock ticking again, its steady rhythm louder now, almost mocking the stillness between us. He finally turned to me, his eyes unreadable. You've been lying to yourself too, haven't you? The words hung in the air. He didn't need an answer. We both knew. The water moved in my memory again, but this time I didn't look away. I didn't answer him. Not yet, but I could feel it, deep in my chest, the weight of what I'd carried for so long. And for the first time in years, I wondered if it was enough to let go. I looked out the window, watching the clouds shift. The night didn't seem so endless anymore. But it wasn't over, not yet. The phone rang once, then twice before I could answer it. I hesitated, fingers pressing lightly against the edge of the receiver. The quiet in the room felt thick, almost like it was waiting with me. The walls, the floor, even the air around me. It all seemed to hold its breath. It was Caleb's name on the screen. It shouldn't have made my chest tighten the way it did, but it did. I picked up the phone, the receiver cold against my ear. I hadn't heard his voice in months. I wasn't ready to hear it now, but when he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. I'm coming back to town, he said. I let his words hang there, caught between us like smoke. The room felt too small all of a sudden, like the walls were pulling in. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't even sure I wanted to know why he was calling. The quiet was unsettling, the kind that comes after years of not speaking. I hadn't seen Caleb in so long, and the thought of him walking the same streets, past the same landmarks, felt like an echo I wasn't ready to hear again. Outside, the world was moving on without us. The sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the yard. The air smelled like rain, thick and damp, the kind that makes everything feel heavy, even the earth beneath your feet. I glanced out the window, not really seeing anything. Just the same familiar view, trees lining the street, the old porch steps cracked from years of use, the mailbox that had never stood quite straight. But Caleb had left all that behind. He'd been gone long enough to forget the rhythm of this place. Or maybe it was that this place had forgotten him. I imagined him walking back down that familiar road, seeing the same street signs, the same faded buildings. but now they'd all be different through older eyes. And the thought of that, the thought of what he had seen over the years, something tightened in my chest. Why was he coming back now? The line was quiet, and I could feel the weight of the silence stretching out between us. Caleb hadn't said anything more, and I didn't know if I should ask him. What do you mean, you're coming back? My voice sounded rough, like I'd swallowed something sharp. I've been thinking about it, Caleb said. His voice was steady, measured.
To source her off.
Too steady. I couldn't hear anything in it, no anger, no frustration, just a calmness that felt like it had been rehearsed. Thinking about it, I had spent years thinking about this moment, about what it would feel like when he came back, what I would say, what I would do. I had imagined 1,000 different conversations in my head, but never this one. I'll be in town next week, he said after a long pause. I thought it was time to talk. The words settled into the air between us like dust. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't making demands. He was just saying it, and that was worse than anything. The way he said it, like it was just something that had to happen. He was entitled to this return. I pressed my fingers against the table. Had I been waiting for him all these years? Had I been waiting for something to break, for him to come back, so we could fix whatever it was that had never been right? But it wasn't that simple. What was it? Caleb had lived a life outside of this place, outside of the shadows I'd spent years trying to forget. What did he see in those years away? What did he learn that made him think it was time to come back? I wanted to ask. But I didn't. I turned away from the window, my heart beating louder in my chest now. I didn't think you'd ever come back, I said, almost to myself. There was a long pause. Then, a breath from Caleb. I know, he said, and for the first time I heard something in his voice, something deep and quiet. Not regret, not guilt, but maybe a kind of acknowledgement. I didn't know if I would either. I felt the weight of those words settle over me, thick like the night air. What had he been running from all these years? Or had he been running towards something else? I've been. Caleb started, then stopped himself, like he couldn't quite figure out how to say it. I waited. But he didn't continue. Why now? I asked instead, a little too quickly. Why are you coming back now? I could hear the faint rustle of papers on his end, the sound of him shifting in his chair. Then he said, It's time. That answer, so simple, so final, left me unsettled. What did he mean by that? Was he coming back to fix something? Or was it just about being here, filling up the space that had been empty for so long? Do you remember the last time we talked? I asked. He didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air, waiting. I remember, he said softly, but that was a long time ago, was it? It didn't feel like it, and yet it had been years since the last time I had seen him. Last time we had spoken. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something I didn't know how to face, but something I couldn't avoid. I sat down on the couch, my hand still pressed against the receiver. The quiet stretched out again, but this time it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was filled with something heavier. Caleb was coming back. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what he had seen in all those years away. What had changed in him? What had changed in me? The streetlights outside flickered on, casting long shadows across the room. The world outside felt like a memory, a place I had once known, but it had moved on without me. Caleb had moved on too. I thought about him walking through the same streets again, seeing everything through older eyes. And the thought made something shift in me, something old and heavy. The phone line crackled. I'll see you soon, Caleb said, his voice softer now. I didn't respond. I didn't have anything to say. I hung up the phone, and the quiet settled back around me. I wasn't ready. But I didn't know if I ever would be. The diner looked the same as it always had. Cracked linoleum floors, faded booths, the smell of old coffee and frying bacon hanging in the air. The neon sign outside buzzed quietly, its flicker a constant hum. I sat by the window, my fingers tracing the rim of my coffee cup, watching the mist rise from the lake, thick like something holding its breath. When the door opened, the bell above it jingled, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. I didn't need to look up. I knew it was him. Caleb stepped in, his coat a little too big, shoulders hunched, his eyes scanning the room, the moment stretched out. The years didn't seem to matter. Not right then. It's funny how some places never change. I'd driven here so many times when we were kids, the lake always on the horizon, pulling us toward it. The diner, a halfway point on the road between where we were and where we wanted to be. And now, sitting in that booth, the diner felt like a memory frozen in time, like it had stayed the same so the world outside wouldn't have to. The same faded checkered pattern on the floor, the same chipped mugs stacked on the counter. The same waitress behind the counter, her name tag crooked and worn from years of wear. And there I was, waiting for Caleb, waiting for something to break. I could feel the quiet between us already. It hadn't even started yet, but I knew it was there. In the way the coffee tasted bitter, the way the steam from the lake fogged up the window. Caleb hadn't been here in years, not since he left, but here I was, still waiting. I felt the weight of the years between us. Years of silence, years of unspoken things. The coffee wasn't hot enough to burn my tongue, but it burned inside me just the same. The door opened again and I couldn't help but look up. This time, he had walked in, but for a second I couldn't place him. Caleb had always been taller than me, but now there was a heaviness to him, like the weight of years had settled in his shoulders. His face was lined in places I didn't remember. The boy I knew was hidden in someone else's skin, someone older. But his eyes, those eyes were still the same, that familiar light. The same look I had seen across the dinner table for years. Yeah. He stopped for a second, just inside the door, as if checking to make sure this was real, that he hadn't imagined it. I could feel the shift in the room the moment he walked in. Ah! He walked. It wasn't dramatic, it was just there. Like everything around us knew this was where we had to be, but neither of us knew how to start. I looked down at the coffee cup, letting my fingers press against the rim again, careful not to touch the liquid inside. Now, there was no rush. He'd come to me. He made his way to the booth slowly, as if he wasn't sure if it was okay to move any faster. And when he sat down across from me, everything felt too still. "A long time," he said, his voice soft but rough, like he hadn't used it much in a while. "Yeah," I replied, trying to smile but not quite making it. The words felt hollow. The waitress came over, dropping 2 menus in front of us. Caleb didn't reach for one. I didn't either. There was nothing to say yet. The silence between us stretched like an old wound that hadn't quite healed. I could feel it pulling tighter the longer we didn't speak. "I'd up first, Tashin." He stared at the menu, his eyes darting over the words without really seeing them. I watched his hands, big, calloused, like he had been working with them for years. Finally, he put the menu down, looking up at me. "So, what's new?" he asked, his tone still measured, as if he didn't want to force anything out of me. I shrugged. "Same old, work, bills, life," he nodded, but it wasn't the answer he was looking for. I knew that much. He wasn't here to talk about work or bills. So you came back," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "After all this time, why now?" Caleb looked out the window, his eyes following the line of the lake. "I don't know," he said, his voice quiet. "I guess I needed to come back." "Needed to?" I pressed, my pulse quickening. "Why?" After everything, he didn't answer right away. He just sat there, his hands folded on the table in front of him. The stillness between us grew deeper, heavier. "I don't know what you want me to say," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I don't know if it matters anymore." It wasn't the answer I wanted. I wasn't sure what answer I wanted. But it wasn't that one, not the "it doesn't matter anymore" answer. I leaned back, the back of the booth pressing against my spine. "It matters to me," I whispered. Caleb didn't say anything after that. He just looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time in years. Not the girl he left behind, not the child he remembered, but someone different, someone he couldn't place. The waitress came back, setting down 2 cups of coffee, but neither of us reached for it. We just sat there, the steam rising between us like a wall. The minutes passed slowly, dragging out the silence until it felt too much to bear. Caleb looked out the window again, his gaze far away, lost in something I couldn't see. I reached for my coffee finally, taking a slow sip, the bitter warmth spreading across my tongue. It didn't taste the way it should have. It didn't taste like comfort. I didn't know if I was ready for this, Caleb said, his voice softer now, almost to himself. I put the cup down slowly. Neither was I. Outside, the lake shimmered in the fading light. Everything felt both too close and too far at the same time, but neither of us moved. The truth was still out there somewhere, and I wasn't sure if either of us was ready to say it yet, but we would, eventually, and I didn't know if I was ready to hear it. Nah. The window in front of me was still cracked, the cool night air slipping through, carrying the scent of damp earth and something distant. The light from the street lamp outside pooled across the floor in thin slices, just enough to make the shadows feel alive. I hadn't meant to ask. I hadn't meant to open the door to it. But when Caleb sat across from me, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his gaze didn't meet mine. Not right away. And when he finally spoke, his words hung in the air like they didn't belong to either of us. I went back, he said, his voice barely a whisper to the lake. I didn't know what I expected when Caleb walked through the door. The same face, the same eyes, but something was different. The years hadn't just changed the way he looked, they had changed the way he carried himself. There was something heavier now, something he hadn't let go of. The diner, the lake, those familiar places had always been filled with ghosts for us. But hearing him say it, that he'd gone back, sent a strange shiver up my spine. I wasn't ready for what he might say next. I sat across from him, both of us holding the space between us, as if we had both been waiting for something, some kind of sign, some moment that would explain it all. Outside, the rain had started to fall softly. I could hear it tapping against the window pane, soft but constant. The quiet of the night seemed too thick now. Even the walls felt like they were listening. I knew something was wrong, Caleb continued, his fingers tightening against his jeans. He didn't look at me. Instead, he looked out the window, as if the words he was about to speak could be swallowed by the darkness outside. I went back after you left that night. I had to. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. He didn't wait for me to ask. He just kept talking, like the story needed to come out, like he couldn't keep it buried anymore. Caleb shifted in his seat, his eyes tracing the edges of the room as if the walls held something he didn't want to see. He took a slow breath before speaking again. When I got there, the lake was still. Too still. Like it was holding its breath. You know how it looks, when the water's calm, the way everything just stops? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could remember the calmness of that night. All I could remember was the sound, the way the water lapped at the shore, its rhythm matching the pounding in my chest. But Caleb seemed to see something different. I looked around, he went on, and there were marks in the mud. Footprints, old ones, but they were too clean, like they hadn't been washed away. His voice softened, almost as if he wasn't sure whether he wanted to keep speaking, but he did. And there was something else, he added quietly, as if the weight of the words surprised him. Something I never noticed before, a piece of the dock, half of it was gone, like it had been. Torn out or taken, I felt a coldness slide over me, creeping in through the cracks I hadn't noticed before. He was saying things that didn't belong. Things that didn't fit into the version of the story I had built for myself. You didn't tell me, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. You didn't say anything about it then. Caleb's eyes met mine then, but his gaze didn't quite reach me. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was seeing. I didn't know if it mattered, but it mattered now. I could feel it. The air between us felt heavy now. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of us could say. When Naum, his eyes looked at me but didn't see me. Not really. They were focused on something far away, something only he could understand. You knew, I whispered, more to myself than to him. You knew something had happened. Caleb's hands clenched in his lap, his knuckles white. He didn't respond at first, as if the words were too heavy to lift. Afanti potment burrs den de tai for tang soft ferber, ses at this hatheraming as third upon. I didn't want to admit it, he said, finally, his voice low. I didn't want to believe it. His gaze dropped to the table, his fingers twitching as if he were still trying to hold on to something. But when I saw the marks, when I saw how the mud had been disturbed, I knew. My throat tightened, and I wasn't sure if I was angry or afraid. The truth, the one I'd pushed away for so long, was crawling out of the dark, and I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know what to say to you then, Caleb went on, his voice cracking. And I didn't know if it was my place to make you remember. I could feel my heart pounding now, louder than the rain outside. But you knew, I repeated, the words coming out like they were too big for my mouth. Why didn't you say something? He looked up at me then, his eyes tired but clear. Because I wasn't sure if I was protecting you or myself. His words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of years we had both spent avoiding the truth. What really happened, Caleb? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment he didn't answer. He just looked at me like he was searching for something, trying to find the words that could make sense of everything. But there were no words, not yet. The clock on the wall ticked louder now, its rhythm too fast for the silence that had settled between us. The sound of the rain outside was muffled, like it belonged to a different world. I could feel the cracks in my own story, the things I had told myself to keep going, to keep pretending that I didn't know what had happened that night. The laser, the marks, the missing piece of the dock. I looked at Caleb, and for the first time, I saw the weight he had been carrying, the same weight I had never let myself see. He was still searching for something in my eyes. Maybe he was looking for forgiveness. Maybe he was waiting for me to speak the words that would make all of this real, but I couldn't. Not yet, the truth was still waiting for us, but it wasn't ready to be spoken. The rain began to fall harder, the sound of it pressing in around us. I didn't know what to say. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The coffee sat cold between us. Neither of us reached for it, though the steam had long since disappeared. The cup was chipped, its edge worn from years of use. And outside, the lake glinted in the pale morning light, calm and indifferent. I couldn't stop looking at it. Its stillness felt like everything we had avoided, like a mirror showing the truth we refused to face. Caleb didn't speak. His hands gripped the mug, fingers tight around it, as if he needed something to hold on to. And I was waiting for the words to come. But they didn't. It had been a long time since I'd sat in this house. The same walls, the same worn-out furniture, the same quiet that never quite left, no matter how many times I tried to fill it. But now, with Caleb sitting across from me, it felt like the quiet had grown heavier. He wasn't angry anymore, not like he used to be. He wasn't anything, really, just there, listening, watching. I could feel the space between us, thick and slow, like the air was holding its breath. The window beside us framed the lake, the sun shining off the surface in little shards of light. It looked so peaceful, so unchanged. But I couldn't look at it for too long without feeling the weight of the years between us. Years of silence, years of what we hadn't said. I kept my gaze on the coffee cup, trying to find the courage to speak. But it wasn't just about saying the words, it was about admitting them, out loud, to him. Caleb had always been the one who held things in, the one who walked away without asking questions. But today he wasn't leaving. He was here, waiting, and I wasn't sure if that made it easier or harder. The silence stretched, long and tight. My throat felt dry, like something was lodged there, keeping the words from coming. I looked down at my hands, clasped tightly in my lap. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind so many times, I thought I knew what I would say. But now, with Caleb sitting there, waiting, it all felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I finally looked up at him. He was still holding the coffee cup, his eyes a little distant, like he wasn't quite sure if he should be here. I wondered if he was as afraid of the words as I was. I started, but the words were too big, too sharp, they didn't fit. He looked at me then, his expression unreadable. His jaw tightened just a little, as if he were preparing himself for something. "You don't have to say it," he said softly, "not if you're not ready." But I was ready, wasn't I? I had been carrying it for so long, pretending it wasn't there. It had lived inside me, quiet and heavy, and I had thought if I didn't speak it aloud, maybe it wouldn't be real. But it was real, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it ate at me. The words had to come out. They had to. I did something, I whispered. Something that night. Something I shouldn't have. Caleb didn't interrupt. He just sat there, still and waiting. And I felt the weight of it all, like a dam breaking inside me. I could feel the tension in the room, his quiet, my own breath, the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Tell me," Caleb said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. His gaze didn't leave mine, but his hands were still wrapped around the cup, his fingers slightly trembling. I didn't know where to start. The story I'd built, the version I'd told myself, it wasn't enough anymore. Not when I was looking at Caleb, not when he was right here, asking for something I didn't know how to give. It wasn't just the lake, I began, my voice shaking. It was what happened before. I didn't stop it. I should have stopped it, but I didn't. I didn't do enough. Caleb's eyes flickered just for a moment. A slight narrowing of his gaze, but he didn't say anything. He didn't move. I thought if I didn't say anything, it would be okay, that we could just pretend it didn't happen. That we could just forget. The words were coming now, spilling out faster than I could control them. But it didn't go away, Caleb. It never went away. I looked at him, desperate for something, anything, to tell me that it was okay, that I wasn't beyond redemption. He didn't look away, he didn't flinch. "You weren't alone," he said quietly. "You never were." His words hit me harder than I expected, a wave of something I couldn't explain. I swallowed, the lump in my throat growing bigger. He didn't look angry, he didn't look hurt. He looked resigned, as if he had known all along, as if this moment had been waiting for both of us, and in the quiet spaces between us. I sat there, my hands now resting on the table, my fingers lightly tapping against the wood. The coffee sat untouched, cold and still, just like everything else. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved in a little, like the space we had shared for so long had finally caught up to us. We had both been living in silence, both pretending that we didn't know the truth. And now here it was, the lake outside still glinted, its surface barely disturbed by the wind. Nothing had changed there. It was indifferent, untouched by the words we had just said. I looked at Caleb, and for the first time in years I saw him fully. Not the brother I had lost, but the one I had always known. The one who had carried his own truth, just like I had carried mine. He stood up slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, but the words didn't feel like they were enough. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew one thing, the truth had been waiting for us all along, and now it was here. And we would have to face it together. The door to the diner swung closed behind us, its bell jangling a little too loud in the stillness outside. The night had settled in around us, thick and quiet, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and the distant scent of pine. The streets were empty, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped off the curb first, the gravel crunching under my shoes, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel Caleb's presence behind me, just a few steps off, his footsteps matching mine in the dark. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. The lake was just ahead, the water barely moving like it was waiting too. The lake had always been there. It had seen everything, heard everything. I used to sit by it as a child, my toes in the cool water, the sounds of the world muffled by its vastness. The world felt bigger back then, or maybe I just didn't know how small I was. But now, standing at its edge again, the lake felt indifferent. It moved slowly, as it always had, but it wasn't comforting. It didn't give me answers. It only carried the secrets of those who had stood by it before. Caleb was beside me now, his hands jammed in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the water. I couldn't bring myself to look at him, not yet. Not when I still felt the weight of the words we had spoken inside the diner. The truth, finally spoken aloud, had left a bitter taste in my mouth, but it wasn't enough to erase the silence that had come before. I could feel the space between us, stretched thin and fragile like a thread waiting to snap. So many years of unspoken things had built up, and now it was all out in the open. But nothing had been fixed, nothing had been resolved. We were still standing here, together but apart, staring at the lake. The same place, the same water, but somehow different. Caleb took a step closer to the edge, his gaze fixed on the still water. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and unspoken. The sound of the wind through the trees was the only thing that filled the silence between us. So kawatarkard to. Yeah, he finally spoke, his voice low. I didn't mean for it to go this way. I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or to the water. His words felt like they belonged to someone else, to a version of Caleb I hadn't known in years. The boy who left, the one who disappeared without a word, had been replaced with someone who couldn't even look me in the eye. I know, I said quietly. Neither did I. Kyo, he's I guy prior. We stood there for a moment longer, the weight of those words hanging between us, neither of us daring to reach for them again. Caleb shifted, his shoulders stiff like he was trying to shake off something that had settled deep inside him. He took a slow breath, then let it out in a quiet sigh. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said, his voice almost inaudible over the rustle of the leaves. But I wasn't, I just ran. He didn't look at me when he said it, and I didn't look at him either. It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was the one he was capable of giving. I nodded. Even though my throat felt tight, I wasn't sure if I had anything to say in response. The lake's surface rippled slightly, as if it too was trying to find a way to speak. There was no easy way to forgive. We had both spent years living with the story we had built, the story that kept us from facing what had happened. But now, with the truth laid bare between us, I realized something. Forgiveness didn't feel like an answer. It didn't feel like something I could give or even receive. It just felt empty. The lake didn't need to forgive the world around it. It just moved endlessly without asking for anything in return. I thought I could forget about it, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I thought if I didn't say it, if I didn't think about it, it would just go away. Caleb's hands tightened around the edge of his jacket, his breath slow, almost hesitant. You can't forget, can you? Yeah. You? His words weren't harsh, but they were final. No, I replied, my voice small against the sound of the water. You can't. He shifted again, looking down at the ground, then at the water, his eyes narrowing, as if he was searching for something that wasn't there. I don't know if we'll ever get it right, he said softly. I don't know if we can fix what we've lost. The honesty in his voice made something shift inside me. It was a quiet admission, a simple truth that neither of us had wanted to face. We had both been running from it for so long. But we can't go back, I said, the words almost choking me. We can't undo it. Aber river for Kant or Fachas. No, Caleb said, shaking his head, but we can move forward. Or Nas. And just like that, the air between us felt thinner, like the weight of years had lifted, even if only for a moment. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that moving forward was enough, but I knew it wasn't. Not yet. Caleb stood up slowly, his eyes still on the water, his expression unreadable. The wind picked up, rustling the branches overhead, but neither of us moved. Hey, I'll leave tomorrow, he said, his voice soft. I nodded at Mern Hampemdi. I'll leave tomorrow, he said, his voice soft. I'm not staying. I nodded. There was nothing else to say. The lake didn't care. It kept moving, just as it always had, carrying its secrets and its memories, unchanged by the passing of time. Goodbye, Caleb, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he heard me. He turned to leave, his footsteps slow, steady, fading into the distance. I stayed by the water, the night settling around me like a blanket. I wasn't sure if I had forgiven him or if I ever would. But the truth had been spoken, and now I had to live with it. I stared at the lake, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything we had lost. And somehow it was enough for now.